Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Wednesdays, we talk about some of the things that affect you in your daily lives, some of the economic issues and national, local, international issues that may have an impact on what you do in the future and what happens in the future. Some of the things you might want to consider when you're looking at maybe some of the issues coming up, like, for example, today when you're looking at whether or not to take that additional EIDL loan that you just got an application for. So we'll talk about a lot of different things. It's not a financial planning show, so I'm not going to help you with your personal financial planning, but I may talk about some things that I think you might want to consider in your personal financial planning. Some of the things that might impact that as it relates to your retirement and your investments and things like that. So anyway, that's the purpose of the show, is just to kind of air out some of these things. And we do welcome calls, 220-9788, 220-WSTU, if you have a comment or a question about something. I wanted to thank Merle Dimbath for joining us last week. That was, it's nice to have someone of his expertise and talent. Many of you know Merle from when he used to, years ago here, I think it was Channel 12 or Channel 12, I think, used to have him on the nightly economic update on the evening news. So it was really, I remember watching him in the day, and he has quite a bit of economic history and a PhD and all of that kind of thing. So it's kind of nice to have him involved. By the way, my name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA. My background is as a CPA running a public accounting practice, but prior to that, I was also in the banking industry, running banks for a period of time, both on the financial side and the operations side. And before that, I worked for one of the big CPA firms dealing with banks and finance up in Chicago. So I had spent a little bit of time in the financial industry, which is really kind of interesting because you get to see some of the front edge type things that come about, and how they make a difference from a financial standpoint on a micro level. On a macro level, doesn't really change things a whole lot. It doesn't seem like we get better information sometimes, but in general, it's quite a bit different than it's quite a bit different than the micro side. And when I say that, microeconomics is basically the study of individual businesses, private businesses, things like that. And macro is the big picture, the government side of it. The international, national, GDP, GNP, those kind of things. And so it's kind of interesting to look at some of the things that have happened in the economics world and what's going on right now. And one of the things we were talking about was some of the issues coming up with that may have an impact, frankly, on the global economy, and it could have an impact on what happens with certain situations. For example, we always talk about trade deficits, and we talk about and we talk about gross domestic product, gross national product, and things like that, and those are all denominated in dollars. So part of economics is figuring ways to measure economic results. Gross domestic product is one. Those are different ways that you measure economic results. And over the years, the results and the theory doesn't change, but sometimes what they include in the calculation changes. So in our for example, right now, a lot of those calculations were based on our country being primarily a manufacturing environment, and we've switched more to a service environment. So they've tweaked with that, but over a period of time, some of those benchmarks that we've used to try to compare historically is not comparing apples to oranges because the economy has changed. And so if the weighting is heavy towards manufacturing in some of those ratios and some of the numbers that they're looking at, and we've switched so that we're big into service, then that is going to have an effect on our analysis because we may misread some of the historical numbers. Doesn't mean the history has changed. Doesn't mean the results have changed. It's just the mix of how things are done may have changed, which means that the index that we're using to measure those statistics may not be valid anymore. And so there's a couple things that I think that I think a lot of people are looking at on some of these statistics as we're struggling with this with the economy and the pandemic. And I think what's causing a lot of problems is that we're measuring uh, using statistics to measure certain things that no longer exist or have shifted. For example, labor. Labor is, in a service industry, there's a higher labor cost naturally than there is in a manufacturing industry. So if the economy is increasing and and we're looking at bad numbers, we would assume, for example, that if manufacturing is increasing, it would be creating a certain number of jobs, um, and if it's decreasing, it would reduce a certain number of jobs. Well, if those jobs have switched from manufacturing to the service industry, then we're going to have a situation at that point where there is a where it's not going to produce the results it's always produced. So if an increase in manufacturing had typically generated a certain number of increase in jobs, then then that would have and now that's changed so that we're a service industry that maybe the manufacturing doesn't create those jobs anymore. Uh, then then if an economist is looking at those numbers, they may misread the future, and that's what people try to do with economics. It's great at evaluating what's happened in the past. We can always go back and tell why it didn't work, and it helps us determine that. But going forward, we're using statistics and metrics to try to determine what's going to happen, and if some of the historical statistics are now no longer valid because the economy has changed, we are going to misread that and maybe make decisions that are really not going to be valid. For example, the other thing that comes up is manufacturing typically generates very high paying jobs. Usually the manufacturing jobs, the labor in manufacturing is union labor, and a lot of times it tends to be the highest price labor because it is up the chain, so to speak. People work their way up to some of these manufacturing jobs from service jobs and things like that, and they pay more money. I mean, if you look at, for example, the manufacturing that's done at Vought, or whatever it's called now. It used to be Grumman. That type of manufacturing were relatively high paid jobs. So when Martin County and got an increase in that, when they gained that plant and then subsequently lost it and then subsequently got it back, we gained and lost some relatively high paying jobs, and it had an immediate impact on our economy. It had an impact on a lot of things, schools, taxes, and a lot of things. So but if, for example, we had lost or gained the same number of service jobs, wouldn't have necessarily produced the same economic result because of the level of those jobs, many times, and the salaries that those jobs get versus the manufacturing jobs. So what I'm getting at is that we're in a big flux right now that I'm concerned in terms of we have the government trying to make decisions, not only our government, but international governments trying to make decisions now on uh, stimulus that they put into effect that they're not exactly sure what it's going to create, and they're changing things as well that uh, that may impact where those jobs go, where they're created, and how they're created internationally. So, for example, the new tax laws, where they're trying to tax corporations, and that is going to potentially put the United States at a disadvantage against companies that are headquartered outside the United States, because those companies don't pay the same tax rate that we have. Our taxes will be higher. Um, then it could force those high paying jobs, the headquarters jobs, the manufacturing jobs. It could force those outside the country. Um, and uh, and as we talked about, corporations don't pay tax, even though you want to say it does. We can call it that, and we can raise it from 21 to 28. We can raise it from 21 to 58. It doesn't really make any difference. Corporations don't pay tax. Small companies do. Pass-through entities do, and that puts them out of business generally because they can't get a return that's enough to make a living, so they quit and go sell the business or abandon it and go out and get another job. But but in a large company, when you increase taxes on a large company, it results in inflation. That's what it results in. It does not get passed along. The investors. I saw something the other day that said, well, the investors will end up making a lower return. No, they won't. No, they absolutely won't, because the investors are all of you listening out there. And so when you find out that the value of your Ford stock has now gone down, um, and and you now are looking around and you can buy Toyota stock for the same or better price than the Ford stock, and it's the same amount of risk, you're going to buy the Toyota stock. That's what you're going to do. And frankly, you don't have that decision, because that stock is being bought within a mutual fund or some other method, or it's being managed by a profit sharing or pension plan. And the people that are making those decisions are maximizing return, because that's their job. Their job is to take your retirement money and maximize the return. And if they don't, it means the government's going to have to shell out more money to you in retirement, because you aren't going to have the money to support yourself. So you'll be a bigger drain on the social system. So either way, that money has to be covered. So the bottom line is they are not going to pass that cost on to their shareholders. Their shareholders will not pay that cost. They will not. It doesn't happen. They move, they sell, they buy something else, even if it's something out of the country. And previously, a number of companies had delisted. They were outside the United States. They dropped from the New York Exchange and went to other exchanges. So so that there's not that kind of control over them. So that's what realistically happens. So what happens then when you get taxes? Well, to pay that tax, you can't pass it on to the shareholders. You have to either reduce material costs or reduce labor costs. Well, in the manufacturing industry, what we've seen over the years is that we've reduced labor costs. And how have we done that? Well, like I said, these are generally high-paying jobs. They're usually skilled, well-trained people. So what ends up happening is that you end up finding a way to replace them with equipment, with productivity changes, so that one person now could do the job of five. How do you do that? Well, you create equipment that you have a one-time cost on, and that equipment then does the work of five, and you have one person to run it. And so you've cut your labor force by basically 80% is what it boils down to. So that is and that's what's going to happen. So we're going to have an impact on labor. Now, the thing is that if that was happening in manufacturing, in the manufacturing sector, it wouldn't it would have an impact. It has a great impact because of the level of jobs, the dollar amount of the jobs that have been eliminated. So that's going to cost a lot of money to the economy. The reason we don't see that as happening as much is that it's happening on the service sector, where the salaries are not as high. So it's eliminating lower price salaries, which frankly don't show up, don't have as much impact statistically as immediately as you would think, because of the dollar amount of the wages that are being eliminated. So when you look at the total effect of unemployment or reemployment, it's happening at a very low level, maybe 11, 12, $13 an hour, versus happening at 25, 30, $35 an hour, $40 an hour, which has a more immediate impact. That's why a lot of this stuff hasn't had as much impact. But what we got was a lot of stagnation. And last week we talked a little bit about the Carter era, and during that era we had what was referred to as a stagflation. In other words, we had inflation with stagnant wages, or below par wages. Now, because of the shift of the economy to the service industry, and generally the lower wages of the service industry versus the manufacturing industry, we had that same effect during the Obama recovery. A lot of economists were taken aback by the Obama recovery. They talked about how many jobs it was creating. And, oh, yeah, we've created this job, we've created these jobs, and we're creating all these jobs that we had lost. But the problem was that we were creating those jobs in the service sector, which was lower priced jobs that produced less effect on the economy. There's less disposable income in those jobs. When somebody's making $50 an hour, $40 an hour, they have a lot more money to spend on cars and clothes and boats and houses and all those kind of things than somebody that's making $12 an hour. So if I lost a job that's $40 an hour and I replace it with a job that's 10, that has almost zero impact on the economy. The fact of the matter is that if I lost a $40 an hour job and replaced it with four $10 an hour jobs, you're saying, well, I replaced the $40 lost with $40 gained. And that's what it looks like from a high level. But the $40 that was gained was $10 a person, and that didn't give any one of them the disposable income that the person that was making 40 had. So a loss of a $40 job has a very, very significant effect on the economy, both locally and nationally. Then replacing it even dollar for dollar with four, $10 jobs. It just, because of the level of disposable income that person has. That's why when the pipeline jobs were lost, people said, well, just go get other jobs. We'll retrain you, go get other jobs. Yes, they'll get other jobs, but probably not at that level, which means that for those communities that lost those jobs, and those countries like Canada that lost those jobs, you're going to take people who were making a fairly sizable amount of money, say $40 an hour, and replace them with people making 10. Because yes, the economy is going, but it's not generating a lot of high paying jobs. It's generating a lot of lower paying jobs. So that's what we have to be concerned about, that statistically it may look like we're gaining all these jobs, but we need to know what kind of jobs they are and what kind of disposable income they carry with them and what kind of purchasing power those jobs have. Because if we eliminate a lot of jobs that had significant purchasing power because they were higher income jobs, and replace them with a lot of lower income service jobs, even if we hire way more people, bottom line is that we're not going to create the effect on the economy. Now, what's actually going to happen in the service industry, because we've already seen it, is that as taxes increase, this is one of the things that it does do. If we replace the job, the 40-hour with a $10 an hour job, we at least provide an income of some kind to people so that they're not as dependent upon the government and social services for income. At least at $10 an hour, $11 an hour, it's not a livable wage in most places, but it at least is covering the amount that the government has to subsidize, unless, of course, they quit completely and just let the government subsidize it, which actually makes more economic sense because you're not paying taxes on unemployment, you're not paying taxes on your Medicaid benefits. So, to a large degree, why work, spend that time, generate that income, and then buy those services when you can just skip the work process and get those services for free, whether it be free education, free health care, free money, stimulus payments, whatever, unemployment. Why would I work when I can make more money not working? And when I say more money, I don't mean dollar amount of money. And that's what people forget, is that there's more to working than the set dollar amount. We usually focus on that because that's the money we need to pay for stuff. But if I make $10 an hour and tomorrow you tell me you're still going to make $10 an hour, but I'm going to send your kids to college, I'm going to not tax you on your $10 an hour, I'm going to give you free health care for everything you need, dental and all of that, and I'm going to provide you with food and clothing and a free cell phone. I just got a pretty good raise. I mean, I really did get a pretty good raise because I don't have to pay for any of that stuff. And and if you can throw in a bunch of other stuff, maybe a free electric car so I don't have to buy gas, and maybe a free solar roof so I don't have to pay for utilities. I don't need $10. I don't need more than $10 an hour. Now I got a livable wage because all of the rest of the stuff is being paid by the government. So if I also don't make enough money to support myself so that the government has to support me, there's a significant cost to that job, to the economy and to society. There's a cost to that job that doesn't come with a $40 an hour pipeline job that was lost, because those people were paying all those fees. So you got to look a little bit at the detail on these and look at some of the things that are going on and what's changing. Hopefully, enough of the stuff is staying the same that you can make some projections, but there's a lot of different balls up in the air, and which ones fall and which ones stay up are going to be interesting. Like I said, in the service industry, a lot of these jobs are being mechanized. And before, it did not make sense for a company to mechanize those jobs. It did not make sense for McDonald's to mechanize those jobs because the cost of labor was fairly low, and it didn't make sense to spend the money developing technology to eliminate a $10 an hour job, $11 an hour job. It just didn't make sense to do that, right? But because those jobs were also not designed to be full-time jobs to support a family. They were designed to be part-time jobs that somebody who's getting back into the workforce, just getting into the workforce, maybe is new to the country, new to the, looking for a job to get started, to start getting some experience. It wasn't meant to be a full-time, this job will pay my family's wage. In many cases, many of the older listeners out there remember, in the old days, your dad worked 2 jobs or 3 jobs. So yeah, it wasn't, no one job was expected to provide the livable wage. You had to work 2 if there were certain types of jobs. You worked 2. And was that hard? Yes, it was very hard. And those of us that went through that realized what it was like. And hopefully we came out stronger. But I'm just saying that it in the day, it didn't make sense to mechanize those jobs because you weren't paying that much for them anyway. Generally, they were part-time. There were no benefits, and you didn't have to worry about all that. Now you're talking about $15 an hour. And in some places, $15 an hour is a significant increase. And I know they're talking about getting there in 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, when you tell business, even if the market was going to move there. Let's say we were eventually going to get to $15 an hour at the same pace. That's why Florida has a minimum wage and has had one for a while, because our economy, because of the tourism, our economy has been robust enough that it continues to grow, and we continue to be able to afford that because we can pass those costs on to people who are here on vacation and are willing to spend that extra money, because it doesn't, it doesn't buy you a beach in Ohio. It doesn't buy you a beach in Illinois. It buys you a beach in Florida, though, so you're willing to pay a little extra for a beach. So what's happening is it has never made sense for McDonald's to do that. In fact, McDonald's went actually the other way. They figured, look, if we train our employees better, they'll eventually become managers, and they'll be trained in our management style. And they'll become managers. Maybe then they'll eventually be franchise owners, and they will then be helping us grow our business. And so McDonald's took a very positive approach. Let's take this from a cost and see if we can create it into an asset or an income stream for us, which they did. So there were many, many people who went to Hamburger U in Oak Park, Illinois, and went through the training and learned how to manage people. And that was extremely valuable. You couldn't get that kind of training even in big companies. You'd go to big companies, you'd have to get to a certain level to be able to go through some of the sales training and some of the personnel training that they offered in those big companies that were fantastic. Everybody wanted to get them, but get that kind of training, but they didn't give it to everybody. They didn't give it to all the people, even the people that were making $30 or $40 an hour. They weren't getting that kind of training. It was saved for those people who were in management already or who were in sales already, not for those who wanted to aspire to it. But here, Hamburger U was teaching those same skills to people who were, making hardly any money an hour. They were training those people, and it worked out for McDonald's. They had one of the best and most diverse franchises, including franchise owners of any of the franchises out there, because they had that commitment to educate. And so their owners understood better what was necessary to run a business, including a McDonald's franchise. And it made them want to buy one. It taught them how to run it successfully and how to make money. So that's what was happening. But now we've extracted that because of the fact that at this point, McDonald's doesn't have that extra $4 or $5 an hour. And you say, well, that's nothing. Well, no, that's huge, because first of all, it's not just $4 an hour going from 11 to 15. It's way more than that, because now all of a sudden you may have to pay some benefits, because these people now may be working full-time, not part-time, because they're working 25 or 30 hours a week. So now you've got some benefit costs that you've got to pay. You can't discriminate against certain classes of employees. So all of a sudden you've got to include them in certain benefit plans that now make the overall benefit plan more expensive. So you can't afford that. So at some point, when you tack on 25 or 30 or 35% benefits, that's another $3 or $4 an hour. So in effect, what you've done is increased an $11 job to a $20 an hour job. So you've increased it $9. You say, well, how big of a deal is that? Well, it's almost double. So that means your labor costs all over the place are going to double for all your franchise owners. They're not going to be able to pay the franchise fees. So all that stuff is going to go up. All of those costs are going to go up. They can't make the profit. They can't afford to pay the fees that they pay to you to have your franchise, because the franchise isn't as profitable as it was before. So now, so we've doubled the labor cost. And we've increased, and furthermore, we have not necessarily increased, we may have increased turnover, which means we may have increased our education costs and our labor costs in training. Why? Because now at this point, you're not catering to just a high school junior who's trying to make money for college. First of all, they don't need to make money for college now. You've taken away that need, right? They don't need to, because you're going to give them free education. So now there's nobody to do that job who previously it was designed for. Let's face it, those jobs were generally designed for people who were either entering the workforce and didn't have any kind of history, or they were designed for part-time employees who were just looking to make a few bucks to pay for college or clothes or a car or whatever. But in general, a lot of it was for people who were going to go on to school or needed money for school, that type of thing. So now, if you're going to take that out of the mix, not only do you not have that job available at $11 an hour, but the person who was applying for that job is no longer out there to a large degree because they've been replaced by somebody who needs that job. And so what you've got is a completely different situation. And that's what we're we're struggling with, is that we've had a complete change in who's going to have those jobs. So at that point, McDonald's now says, I'm not going that route because I see what's coming down the pike is a situation where I'm going to have much higher costs, including benefit costs, for these employees. I'm potentially going to have increased training costs as we go forward. I'm going to have more issues potentially, because now what I have is, instead of having having a job that was really geared towards a person who was looking for a very part-time income and a certain limited number of hours that fit into maybe a schedule with another activity that they were doing, like another job or their school. Now I've got somebody who is looking at this position as more of a full-time, so they need a certain number of hours per week. So now I don't have as many people to juggle around. I've got fewer people, but I'm trying to cover the same number of hours. I may have to adjust those hours. I've got people that have, they're going to need family leave because of illness, things like that, because now this is the job that they need to have to pay for some of this stuff. And it just won't support that even. And that cost gets to be pretty great because of all of the benefits that are either going to have to be provided or that the government's going to require be provided. So all of a sudden you've significantly increased that job. So what do? I go out and replace that job with a piece of equipment, because now it makes sense. Because now I'm not eliminating an $11 job with no benefits, and with a lot of flexibility on my part of how I use that labor, so that I'm maximizing the benefit of that labor. I don't have two $15 an hour people working when I could have had one $11. I could have had one $11 an hour person, two $11 an hour per people covering for that time. Now I have to bring in another $15 an hour person. So my cost of covering extra time now went up if I have to fill in for a sick employee or whatever. All of those kind of things, or vacations, all of those have gone up because I'm not replacing an $11 person with an $11 person, or doubling up two $11 salaries potentially. I'm doubling up two $15 salaries, or replacing a $15 salary with what was an 11. So, but furthermore, it's really a $20 an hour salary because of benefits and everything else that's gone on in there. So at that point, it makes sense for me to spend the thousands and thousands of dollars to develop the technology to eliminate a bunch of those jobs, which, as any of you that have been into McDonald's lately or into any of these places, Burger King and Taco Bell, go inside, and the first thing you see that's different, you still see they're not smiling as much as they used to be, but the smiling faces behind the counter. But the first thing you notice as you walk in the door, immediately to your left, is your kiosk that has all of the stuff that you need to place your order without upsetting anybody. You can pick your pickles and pick your onions and take off your ketchup, and you're all good to go. So you can do all of that now right through that little kiosk. And then you can actually pay for it there. You put your debit card in or your credit card in, you pay for it, and everything's good. And that smiling person behind the counter kind of can keep smiling, but doesn't have many people to talk to anymore. So then what happens? Well, from there, it moves on to not only that, but now that back office, that back operations area where, somebody was slapping the burgers on the grill and somebody was dropping the fries into the fryer. And there were then, putting the pickles and putting the onions and putting all the stuff on top of it. And then they were going ahead and wrapping it up and packaging it, putting it on a tray, getting your soda. And next thing you know, boom, you're out, that job. So there was maybe 3 people back there doing that, getting that all done. There was a couple people at the counter, 3 people behind the back helping with everything, maybe somebody running through the drive-through. And all of those people now, there is technology to replace them. They have technology that can make the burgers or make the tacos, that can put everything together the way you want. The only thing it can't do is it can't deliver the item to your table. But what it can do is it can call and it can say, table 12, please pick up your order. And you can come up and get it just like you can go get your soda, right? Now, all of that, you're still going to have somebody who makes sure that the person that comes in and picks up order number 12 is the person that paid for it, so that people don't steal other people's orders or, that people don't walk out. So you've still got somebody who's got to, you've got to make sure that that doesn't take advantage of the system and that the system is running in the morning. But that's 1 versus 6. So therefore, I've saved a lot of money. I've got one $20 an hour job now, 15 plus benefits, and I've replaced 5, let's say minimum 5 $20 an hour jobs. So I've replaced $100 an hour with $20 an hour, made up $80. So you can tax me, yes, go ahead. I just eliminated that cost. I shifted it through productivity. I had some money for the equipment, but it was kind of a one-time sunk charge. Once I pay it, I just have to maintain it. And, so that's all I've got. That's what's happening. People are very smart. Businesses in a capitalistic society move, and I didn't say free market, you notice that. I said capitalistic society, will gravitate to whatever is best for them. That's their job. Their job is not to advocate for social welfare. Their job is not, that's not what those guys get paid for. As shareholders, their job is to deliver value to my retirement account. That's what I want them to do. I will decide whether I think what's done with my money is worthwhile or not. It is not for them to decide what churches they're going to support, what religions they're going to support, what causes they're going to support, and what they're going to and what political battles they're going to fight. That's not their job. And if they do that and I don't agree with it, I will take my money and go somewhere else. And so will every other investment advisor, because they're no longer producing the return that they need to produce. If that doesn't produce a bigger return, so what you're betting on in that situation is you're betting on a social system. You're betting on, by taking certain actions, I will sell more burgers. Yeah, that's a pretty big risk, because by taking those, I'm probably not going to, the people that appreciate that are not going to necessarily go out and buy more burgers. But the people that don't appreciate that are definitely not going to buy the same amount of burgers. So you can only lose in that situation. If you're a CEO in that situation of a major corporation, you should immediately get fired by your board. And if your board won't fire you, your shareholders should call a meeting and fire the board and then fire you, because that is not delivering value to the shareholders, and that is your job. Your only job is to create value for your shareholders. That's it. So when you get into all this other stuff, you're not creating any value. And in fact, the only thing you can get out of it is negative. It's almost the only thing you can get because people respond. How many people go online? I hear how many people go online and tell people how great, or call up a person and tell them how great the service was. Some do, right? Occasionally you get a 5-star Google rating, because it's easy. You can do that for first. But when you have a bad experience, how many people go on and post a 1-star and write a review, right? These guys are worthless. They stood around, did nothing. They didn't respond. They didn't fix my stuff. They didn't take care of it the way they were supposed to. They're all idiots. The service is horrible. You need to go to somebody else. What impact does that have on the business? It's huge, right? Negative ratings are huge in Google. So, and you can get 8 positive ratings for every 1 negative rating, and it hurts you. So what's going to happen when you do something that's potentially going to generate a negative response? It's only going to hurt you. It is only going to hurt you. It cannot help you. It's not going to help on the upside. So anyway, that's the kind of things that businesses are concerned about, is maximizing value. So when you say you're going to tax a business, you're not going to tax a business, not a corporation. They're going to pass that along. Now, I've been constantly saying not pass-through entities. What I'm talking about is local businesses, Main Street businesses owned by mom and pop. Those businesses, they pay taxes. They pay the taxes personally. So it bypasses it. They can't sell the company. They can't get rid of the, if they're the shareholder, they can't sell their company and get another company in the same industry. That they have too much invested in it. There's no ability to liquidate their interest. They're committed to it. So for them, it does have an impact. What happens? That's where the bankruptcies occur. You're not going to see a lot of bankruptcies among the Fortune 500 companies. They're too big to fail, really, and they don't have competition. And many of them will get subsidized by the federal government at much higher levels than what's happening right now with small businesses. Small businesses, on the other hand, will crumble under some of this debt. When the industry changes, what's happening right now is the government's giving a bunch of money to save businesses, myself included, to save businesses for us to remain in business. But wait a minute. Should we remain in business? That's the question. And if we do remain in business, is the business going to be the same to be able to produce the results for me to be able to pay that money back? Absolutely not. They're going to give me $500,000, right? They're going to give me $500,000. And I'm going to use that money to support my tax practice, because we had 4 or 5 months where we weren't doing any work because nobody's in. If you don't do any work, you don't get paid. So bottom line is, I'm going to use that money for what they want me to use it for, and it will help my CPA firm and many, many, many other CPA firms survive this. For what purpose? For what purpose? Because everything we're seeing as CPAs says that in the next 5 years, the IRS will be able to process your tax return without the assistance of you or a CPA. They will do your return for you, and they will send you the results. All right. So what's going to happen to the CPA business, where the CPA is doing nothing but filing taxes? They're going to be out of business. They're going to have to do something else: financial planning, consulting for businesses, something else. But the actual and probably the preparation of corporate returns is still going to require some assistance, but not a lot. That's where you'll have a lot of 1099s and stuff like that. So the bottom line is that they're propping up an industry that is going to be is going to be a dinosaur when this is all done, because the government will have to find ways to more efficiently collect taxes. With the money that they're going to need to generate in taxes, you are not going to get voluntary compliance. That isn't going to happen. So what you're going to have is a lot of regulations, a lot of forms that back up what's happening, so that the government can check on you, so they can be directly involved in your life. You say, well, how can they do it? Well, already there's something that's referred to as blockchain. Many of you may or may not have heard of blockchain, but blockchain is a system that's being implemented nationwide at the large at the large companies first, although it is impacting small companies if they're dealing with large businesses. And what happens is that buy something, when you buy something or sell something, let's say you sell something, it generates a transaction that the person that you bought from, they have to record a sale. If you sold it to them, you've got costs of goods sold. You've sold it to them. You've got to collect from them, right? And so you've got a receivable, and then you get the money. You've got to get the money and put it in your bank account. They've got to record it on their books as a purchase, and that they've shown as a purchase of it. Blockchain, all of that is done automatically. It's automatically done. As soon as the initial transaction is implemented, all of the other transactions follow. And they're actually done on the books of all of the other entities simultaneously with your transaction, so that everybody records the transaction the same. Now, you think that's not going to be easy for the government to also see all those transactions taking place and figuring out exactly how much you made? Because they know what you paid for stuff. They know what you sold it for. They know what you did with the money. They know what you bought with it. They have all of those records. They're going to know all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute. How did he buy that boat? How did he buy that motorcycle? I don't see any income coming in. Where did that income come from? All right. Well, then maybe that's unreported income. Maybe there's some cash here that he tried to report outside the system. So now they're going to go find both parties. Now, in the past, for you to record a transaction in cash and not report it, you just had to make sure you didn't put it on your books. But now you got to make sure that the party that you're dealing in the cash transaction with also isn't recording it on their books. What's the chances of that, right? Now, all of a sudden, the system, it becomes auditing. It audits itself. People talk about that when they talk about auditors, public audits and things like that I do. But what they don't think about is also means that the IRS can audit you like that. They will have all of your information. So at that point, you're not going to be able to shift that. CPAs are going to be gone from the tax process because the government won't need it. They'll already know what your income is. They're going to tax you on it. You'll have to prove that that's not the right number. So it's interesting what's going on. That's just one little change, impacted by technology. Wait till we talk about Bitcoin. We'll talk about that next week. Next week, right here on a Wednesday, 9 to 10 o'clock. Treasure Coast Solutions. Put it on your calendar. Join me. Call in if you want. We're here every Wednesday, 9 to 10 o'clock, right on WSTU Digital 1450, whatever that means. Your very, very, very old station.